What I'm about to tell you happened to me about 2 years ago. At that time, I had several months after breaking up with my boyfriend and decided it was time to start meeting new people. That's when a friend recommended me to download Tinder, assuring me that she had done very well meeting people through this application. So I listened to her, and I opened a profile on Tinder. When I first started using this app, I thought my friend was not wrong, because the truth is that I did have several successful dates and I met very interesting guys, but nothing that was long-lasting. However, up to that point, my experience had been positive. Sometime later, I matched with a guy named Frank and I was chatting with him for a few weeks. With this guy, I really connected right away. He was very handsome, tall, red-haired, and wore glasses, which gave him that touch of intellectual man that was really interesting. He had green eyes and a little bit of beard. He was really attractive. He constantly made me laugh with his intellectual jokes and random fun facts he shared. My conversations with him flowed easily, and I looked forward to his messages because they made my day. So when he invited me on our first date, I was more than excited. I had high expectations, and the truth is that he did not disappoint me. We met at a very nice coffee shop that was in a very popular shopping mall in the city. The conversation was just as entertaining in person as it had been by text, and he was just as handsome as he was in his photos. We spent hours talking about everything from our favorite movies to our anecdotes from when we were kids. It was truly an extraordinary evening, the best date I'd had in a long time. By the time we finally left the coffee shop, my ribs ached from laughing out loud at his witticisms, so Frank walked me to my car and there we had a brief and tender first kiss, which promised not to be our last. The next few days we continued to exchange messages, and for our long-awaited second date, Frank planned an outdoor adventure, according to him to take advantage of the spring sunshine. That time we took a walk through a beautiful park in town, where besides enjoying the beautiful scenery provided by the trees and wildflowers, which as everyone knows are twice as beautiful in spring, we also fed the ducks in the lake, and it was really fun, as we started to play dunk on each other. We then spread out a picnic blanket and enjoyed a snack of sandwiches, fruit and wine that Frank had brought. We then lay on the blanket looking at the clouds and chatting, at which point he took my hand and intertwined our fingers, before kissing again. Frank seemed to be a dream of a man. He was sweet, thoughtful, funny, and very handsome. He was perfect, and like everything perfect, he was a big lie. After those first 2 amazing dates, Frank seemed like a totally fantastic guy, and seemed as interested in me as I was in him. So when he suggested I come over to his place to share a bottle of wine on our third date, I agreed without any buts. Things seemed to be going great between us, and I felt comfortable enough to visit him at his apartment. After all, I felt like I already knew him better. For the night of our third date, I really went all out to look stunning, though without going overboard. But I wanted to look fantastic that night, so I chose a short, light, and very pretty summer dress, as well as straightened my hair and did my nails. I told Anna, my best friend, about this new guy I had met on Tinder and how well things seemed to be going between us, and promised to text her later to let her know when I got home. She's always been a little skeptical about meeting people through an app, so whenever I date someone, she texts him when I get home to let him know I'm okay. That night I arrived punctually to the address Frank gave me. It was a very nice and quite tall building, which was very close to downtown. His apartment was on the 7th floor, at the end of a carpeted hallway. He greeted me with his characteristic smile and a short kiss on the mouth, but I could notice something different about him that night. First, he was not wearing his glasses, and second, unlike our other dates, he was not very dressed up. He was wearing a kind of gray jogger and a simple black t-shirt. The truth is that this disappointed me a little, but I didn't think much of it. I figured that since we were at his house, he just wanted to be more comfortable. Upon entering, I saw that the apartment was tidy, but had almost no furniture, only a small dining table, a sofa, and a TV. I also noticed that there was a strong smell of chlorine, as if I had cleaned just a moment ago, but this was just something I observed only casually. As soon as we entered, he told me, "Make yourself comfortable," pointing to the sofa, so I sat down as he indicated. Then he went on to say, "Make yourself at home. I'll bring the wine." He then went into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with 2 generous glasses of dark red wine, and as he handed me mine, he told me that he had been saving that bottle just for that night, with a broad and charming smile on his face. So we clinked our glasses together in a toast and began to drink. But as we drank and chatted pleasantly on the sofa, there were a couple of things that made me a little uneasy. The first is that he never put on his glasses, and I remember he had told me he was very nearsighted and couldn't see anything without them, but he didn't seem to have any difficulty seeing. And the second is that all the time his leg was moving up and down nervously. Even at one point his face got a little sweaty, plus I noticed he was drinking his wine too fast. He didn't seem as relaxed as usual, but rather anxious. But by the time I started to notice this red flag, it was a little too late. I tried to ignore the strange feeling that was taking over the room, as Frank in front of me definitely seemed very different from the previous 2 dates. When about 15 minutes had passed, I started to feel a little dizzy. At first I thought that the wine was taking effect faster than usual, but it got worse very quickly. Suddenly the room started to spin, and my legs and arms felt like they had weights attached to them. It was right at that moment when the alarm started to sound. I already knew that feeling, because once they put a substance in my drink at a college party, and this felt exactly the same. At that moment I started to panic, but I tried with all my might to conceal it. Meanwhile, he was watching me intently. It was clear he was waiting for a sign. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew Frank had put something in my wine. I began to do everything I could to keep my condition from being noticed, but my body felt worse and worse, and my vision was becoming blurred. However, I had to do something before I lost consciousness completely. So, trying to control the trembling of my voice and making a superhuman effort not to show how sleepy my tongue was, I asked Frank to pour me another glass of wine. And as soon as I saw that he moved to the kitchen, I quickly got up from the couch and told him I was going to the bathroom for a moment. As best I could, I got to the hallway, trying not to stumble too much but walking as fast as my condition would allow. For an instant I saw him coming towards me, but then I quickly locked myself in the bathroom and swiped the latch. I immediately pulled out my cell phone and with trembling hands I dialed 911. My mind was very confused at that moment, but I tried to hold on to consciousness with all my might, and all I managed to say to the operator was, "I'm on a date and my partner drugged me." I could vaguely hear when someone said, "The police are on their way." And that's the last thing I remember before I collapsed to the floor. While I was there, lying on the floor, the only thing I remember was hearing very loud banging on the door and Frank's completely angry voice shouting things that I couldn't understand then. All this while the room spun and spun around me. After that, I felt myself falling as if into some kind of tunnel, and everything else is blurred and distorted images. Lights, shadows, the sound of a siren, more banging on the doors, voices that were distorted, unfamiliar faces hovering above me, talking urgently, a pinprick in my arm, and little snippets of conversations about fluids, vital signs, and a toxin analysis, but nothing I could understand in that state. During that time, I felt my body free-falling down a dark tunnel as flashes of consciousness came and went. It was a strange sensation that I don't remember too clearly, as I was not in control of anything or myself. When I finally regained consciousness, I was in a hospital bed with several needles in my veins and the constant beeping of a machine in my ear. There was a uniformed man at my side, who later introduced himself as Detective James. He took my statement, and I agreed to file a report as soon as I was discharged. The detective informed me that they had found evidence of at least half a dozen other women that Frank had supplied with prohibited substances to sexually abuse them, using the same modus operandi he used with me, that is, contacting them on Tinder, gaining their trust on the first 2 dates, and then taking them to his apartment to drink wine, and there he would do the rest. It all seemed like a nightmare to me. It was so surreal what I was experiencing. However, the most terrifying thing came during the trial, when I heard for the first time the testimonies of the other victims, who narrated the horrors to which this disgustingly sick man subjected them. At that moment, I felt terrified to think that he was planning to do the same to me, and at the same time, very fortunate to have come out of that situation with no more than a dose of narcotic substances in my body. Now this monster is facing a long prison sentence for his crimes, and that is the only thing that reassures me about all of this. This experience taught me how cautious women should be when meeting someone online. I hope my story serves to alert you to safety precautions to take when meeting someone online, as well as those to keep in mind when going on a date, such as keeping in touch with a friend, driving separately, observing and being present when drinks are served. And is that while most of the dates that occur through these apps and websites are profitable for those who use them, we must keep in mind that many predators hide under the facade of a decent person and thus get new victims. After this bitter experience, I deleted my Tinder profile, and it was quite some time before I felt confident enough to date again. This whole story started when I was crossing my first year of college. At that time, Tinder started to become very popular among young people. All my classmates had Tinder, so I thought, why not? That's how one day I made a match with a guy named Matt. Matt and I were chatting for a few days, and the truth is that I found him to be a very nice person. He was about the same age as me and was also studying at university. He seemed like a very interesting person to meet. The problem was that I didn't have much free time. However, he was so gracious and interested at all times that I soon decided on a space between my classes and my part-time job at a restaurant to finally meet him in person. We arranged to meet on a Saturday at a small, cozy restaurant near my work. When I arrived, he was waiting for me at the door, greeted me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, and immediately made me feel very comfortable. At all times, he behaved like a gentleman, opened the door for me, pulled my chair out from the table, and the truth is that I really liked that. I liked that he was a gentleman, because that is something that is in short supply in guys nowadays. The truth is that he was also quite a good conversationalist. Things felt very natural and calm. We had a delicious dinner, and overall it was a good date. I was really looking forward to a second one, until the end of the night came. When we were about to end the evening, he started making sexual innuendos, and I tried to handle things as best I could. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't like the tone in which he said and did certain things, and that is, that at one point he ran his hand under the table and put it on my thigh, and then started to caress it. This obviously made me uncomfortable, and I withdrew it immediately. He was insisting that I go with him somewhere else, that the evening had been wonderful, and that he could make it get much better, and then he started hinting at things like that in a row. Several times I tried to change the subject, but then he would go back to making innuendos, and at one point, I had to tell him directly to stop what he was doing and made it clear to him that I was not that kind of girl, and that I was in no hurry. Besides, I didn't know him well enough to trust him on that level. At that point, his countenance seemed to change. He no longer seemed like the same sweet and nice guy I had chatted with all night, and while he wasn't verbally aggressive, I could see tension in his posture and mannerisms after that. I was really disappointed in him. It threw away all the good things that had happened during the night. The atmosphere got so uncomfortable that I quickly told him I had to leave then. Again, he changed his attitude again and wanted to sort of turn things around, going back to being the nice, pleasant, and gentlemanly guy he had been before. But it was done. He still walked me to the door and stayed with me until I took the cab. But when I was about to get in, the very cretin tried to kiss me. At that point, I pushed him away and told him no, and this seemed to bother him a lot. But I ignored him, so I just got in the cab and went home. After that day, he started texting me constantly and at all hours. At that moment, I regretted tremendously that I had given him my number during dinner. His messages were very insistent. At first, he would start out being nice, but I didn't want to hear from him anymore. So I started avoiding him slyly, as I didn't want to be rude. However, when he began to notice that I was avoiding him, his messages became more insistent and then aggressive to the point of threatening me if I didn't respond. One night I attended a conference at the university auditorium, and the moment I walked in, I turned my phone off. The event went on this evening, and when I finally got to my dorm room, I turned on my cell phone, but I was totally stunned when I saw it. It had almost 100 text messages and about 30 calls from Matt. But it didn't stop there, as he then called me 12 more times during the night, one call after another. And when I started reading the text messages, I was even more perplexed with the things they said. This guy was unhinged. And that night he wrote me things like, "Why don't you answer? Why aren't you there when I need you? I need you right now. Are you ignoring me? Where the hell did you go?" and things like that. At one point I couldn't take it anymore and I was totally direct and abrupt with him. I told him to back off, not to write me anymore, and to seek professional help because he was really messed up in the head. However, his response was to tell me that he was in love with me. At that moment I felt these intense twin feelings of embarrassment and fear. Embarrassment at how absurd and pathetic it was to say something like that when we had only met once, and then fear, because I realized that getting rid of this guy would be a total challenge. I sent him a text message telling him that it was completely crazy to say that when we barely knew each other, but he kept up a barrage of attacks that continued well into the night, and each one somehow got creepier and creepier as the night went on. I remember he always sent the messages very quickly, one after the other, so I didn't get to read them all, but there were a couple in particular that said in all caps, "Answer, damn it." And, "I thought you were the indicted one and you were not able to send a message or answer a damn call." Then he followed up with, "Don't play with me, bitch, don't make me come looking for you." But the most bizarre thing of all was that he would later apologize and tell me that he didn't mean those things, but I was making him lose his mind with my indifference. This pattern continued throughout that night. First one set of messages that scared the hell out of me, and then the other. It was as if he was trying to convince me that it was all my fault. That night, I would have wished I had been somewhere other than my dorm room, because this was far from where all my friends from the conference were staying, and there was no one there to defend me if this psycho had really come looking for me. I know I should have stopped reading his messages or just blocked his number for the sake of my own sanity, but at the same time I couldn't stop reading them because I was really panicking at the thought that he knew where I was and could get there at any moment, since in one of his messages he said something like, he was on his way to where I was, so I needed to know if I really needed to worry about my safety. Fearing that he might actually find me, I kept absorbing all these horrible words and threats until at one point I just collapsed, turned off my phone and cried myself to sleep. The next morning I demanded that he delete my number and stop contacting me because he was scaring me, and I let him know that I would block his contact. His response was to call me about 30 times during the day from another number, and then when he realized I wasn't going to respond, he sent me about 30 text messages which I simply deleted and turned off my cell phone. This was becoming a real torture and was affecting my mental health, but as stupid as it sounds, I didn't know what to do. One morning, I had to be awake at 6 to go to college. and I must have forgotten to put my phone on Do Not Disturb because it started chirping my ringtone on the nightstand, waking me up in the process. And when I saw that it was an unknown number on the screen, I just lost patience, so I answered the call and told him that he was acting like a fucking psycho, that he needed professional help, and that I didn't know him well enough for him to be saying all the things he was saying to me, because I just didn't deserve it. I think he was in shock that I answered the call in the first place because he just broke off apologizing and started telling me how sorry he was for being so immature. Without letting me utter a word, he told me that if I gave him another chance, I would be glad I did, that we were perfect for each other, and that he was simply overwhelmed by everything he felt for me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought I had gotten rid of him, but as I listened to him, I knew this was far from over. He started giving me an extremely emotional recounting about our first and only date. It was both scary and depressing, so I just decided to be very direct with him. I told him that I never wanted to see him again, and that if he contacted me again, I would go straight to the police. He didn't even respond when I told him that. He just kept quiet, either out of sadness or anger. But then after a few seconds of silence, I just hung up on him. For the next month, I didn't hear from him. I was so happy and relieved to finally be rid of this crazy guy, and that whole scary incident went from being just a healed wound and something I joked about with my friends, but suddenly, the guy started writing me on Facebook, commenting on all my pictures and posting all kinds of stuff on my wall. I had naively lowered all my privacy settings so that people I knew in college could contact me more easily, since I was still a freshman and wanted to network. It was a big, terrible mistake on my part, and as much as I blocked him and reported his account as quickly as I could, in my mind, the damage was already done, as some of the people I met during that year now thought I had a weird, obsessive boyfriend. After that, he started sending me emails that said things like, "I can't stop thinking about you. It kills me to see you out there and know that I blew all my chances with you. You're such a decent person, but it's pretty hard to think about the hurtful way you handled things." I didn't respond. I just made sure to block all of her social media and email addresses. I figured showing him some attention would only make things worse, and this definitely seemed to work for a while, as his attempts to communicate diminished completely. But then things escalated in a way that was even creepier than his attempts to talk to me online. The last few months of my first year in college, I got another part-time job at a small cafe downtown, and one day, towards the end of a shift, my colleagues started talking about a guy who had been sitting on the steps in front of the cafe for hours, hearing that I had a sinking feeling in my stomach right away. So I quickly asked one of them what the guy looked like, and to my terror, they described my stalker in detail. When I went to make sure it was him, I met him head-on. My stomach turned when I saw him sitting there looking at the front windows of the cafe. We made brief eye contact. It was only for a second, and it became simply unbearable. I told him to leave me alone, and the very cheeky guy assured me it was just a coincidence. Immediately after, I went straight to the back of the coffee shop to tell the manager what was going on. She was very understanding about the whole thing and told me to stay in her office, and then called the police. While she went out to tell the guy that the police were on their way and that he shouldn't be waiting outside a girl's workplace, I remained locked in the small office and completely panicked, as this was already getting out of hand. Throughout that week, I was in contact with a police officer who asked me to share all the records of the times the guy had communicated with me, especially all the threatening messages he had sent me. Fortunately, I was careful to capture all the most violent and threatening messages just in case I had to go to the police. I didn't want it to be an empty threat. I wanted to be able to show them that Matt was really serious. I knew this was necessary so that the police could show up at his house or call him to let him know they knew what he was doing. And that's exactly what they did. They called him to check his responsibility in the act, and then let him know that he had a restraining order, and if he tried to contact me again, he would be in trouble with the justice system. Fortunately, he did not try to contact me again, and that incident of harassment at the cafe was the last interaction I had with him. But unfortunately, it was not the last I heard of him. A year later, I was talking to a girl in the smoking area of a pub. She was drinking and the conversation moved on to student dating. She started telling me how she had gone on a date with a guy she thought was very handsome and charming, and he turned out to be a complete nightmare. I asked her what her nightmare was like, and she basically described exactly the same behavior I had been subjected to the year before. I asked her if the guy's name was Matt, and she was completely dumbfounded. Before saying yes, she asked me how I knew that. That's when I told her about my experience with that same psychopath, and that it was exactly the same thing she experienced as well. To my surprise, it was a recent thing with her, and I was very afraid that he would keep contacting her, so I told her to do the same things I did in order to finally get him away from me. Take screenshots of the messages, take them to the police, and most importantly, not to interact with him. At the time, she was very, very grateful to be talking to someone who knew what was going on, and we kept in touch afterwards. Fortunately, she also managed to get that guy off her back, and we remained good friends even after that. And although we are no longer in the same city, we still keep in touch and have a few drinks from time to time. Fortunately, neither of us ever went through a situation like that again. As a veteran of online dating apps, I thought I had seen it all and was fully prepared to handle any situation. However, my hands still shake when I think about my brief encounter with Nick on Tinder. At first, it all seemed so innocent, just another match on a dating app, but behind Nick's impressive profile pictures, his apparent good vibes and great conversational skills, hid a tremendously narcissistic and manipulative personality, which would take me through a real hell. The first thing that caught my attention regarding this seemingly charming man were the photos on his profile, where he was shown doing all kinds of outdoor activities, hiking on rocky trails, kayaking, and even diving with sharks, all showing off his handsome and well-built physique. Nick's biography made him look like an adventurous nature and fitness lover, and that attracted me immediately. Then I saw that he was also someone who liked philosophy and constantly shared very interesting and intelligent reflections about life and the world in general, and this was what ended up catching me completely. I liked his profile, and within minutes we made a match. He wrote me first and we started chatting. Immediately, this man won my attention, his quick responses to my messages, the way he asked active questions, showed interest in me, and how he remembered the little details I had mentioned, made me feel very special and definitely made me more and more interested in him. That first week, we exchanged phone numbers and went from chatting on Tinder to texting each other. I remember in that first stage, the pin on my phone alerting me that I had a new text message became music to my ears. I felt butterflies in my stomach every time I heard that jingle. Nick and I hit it off wonderfully. It seemed like we had known each other all our lives and we had too many things in common. We were both nature, animal, and outdoor lovers. Plus, we were very focused on healthy living. But not only that, we both also loved photography, dark documentaries, and loved horror movies. Anyway, the more we interacted, the more I was excited to meet this man personally. My imagination was flying as I pictured the awaited first date, and it didn't take much longer to arrive. A few days later, we met at a modern restaurant in the center of the city, where there was a special wine tasting event, which I thought was an excellent plan. I remember that before that first date, I took great care to look beautiful and radiant. I wanted to dazzle him. So I chose a red dress, not very elegant, something casual. I decided to let my black hair down and make beautiful waves, and as makeup obviously could not miss a spectacular red lips to match my dress. I had been thinking about our meeting all day, and I couldn't wait until it was time to see him, so I made an effort to be punctual. although the city traffic didn't help me at all. But even so, I arrived at the restaurant exactly at the agreed time. I parked near the door, and I hurried to check my reflection in the rearview mirror to make sure that my makeup and my spectacular waves had survived intact. And fortunately, so it was. Before entering, I took a deep breath as I was really nervous. It was the first time I felt this way on a first date. It was then when I saw Nick sitting at the bar. I immediately felt an empty feeling in my stomach. God. The pictures didn't do him justice. He was even more handsome in person. He had very masculine features. His well-defined jaw and his intense gaze caught me immediately. And when our eyes finally met, a big smile spread across his face that was absolutely charming. He got up from his seat and walked over to me, and immediately the smell of his perfume flooded my nostrils. He smelled delicious. As soon as he arrived, he hugged me and gave me a kiss on my cheek. He was tall and stocky. This man really attracted me. We sat at the bar very close to each other, and our conversation flowed just as easily as it did through messages. He maintained comfortable eye contact the whole time, as we talked about work, friends, pop culture, and many other topics. There were never any awkward silences or weird jokes or any of the disturbing things that happened to me on other dates. On the contrary, it all flowed very naturally, and I couldn't have been more pleased. After a couple of hours, when we were halfway through the deli board, Nick bent his knee and put it against mine under the table, and just that simple, subtle contact sent shivers throughout my body. He was getting me more and more interested. After dinner and wine tasting, we decided to continue the evening over cocktails at a nearby bar, where we once again sat side by side and talked for hours. By then we were getting into trust, so our bodies got closer and closer, until his arm ended up around me and resting on the small of my back, but not so low as to be uncomfortable or awkward. Around midnight, Nick gently turned my face and kissed me. At that moment, I felt like I was going to swoon. He was perfect, confident yet tender and very gentle. The evening ended beautifully. Then he walked me to my car. We had another brief kiss and arranged to meet a second time. Over the next week, butterflies fluttered constantly in my stomach. Nick and I exchanged non-stop messages about how wonderful it had been to meet in person. He seemed to be as excited as I was about our second date, which happened the following Sunday. That day, we went on a romantic picnic in the park. Things were moving quickly, but in such a natural way that it seemed too good to be true, and as it happens, they were. The next day, a number with the local area code started ringing. Normally, I don't answer unrecognized calls, but something compelled me to answer. On the other end, I was greeted by a woman's voice, a woman who seemed to be very indignant. This person began to tell me that I needed to get away from Nick immediately. She claimed to be his roommate and warned me that he already had a girlfriend that he was going to marry, and that he was just taking advantage of me. But before I could say anything to her, she just hung up. I was absolutely shocked and stunned by all the things he said, so I checked the messages Nick had sent me, but it didn't say anything about him having a roommate. At that point, I called him, perhaps more upset than I wanted to be, and when I asked him about it, he just dismissed it. He claimed that he did have a roommate, but that she was constantly bothering him. He said this girl was sick in the head and to ignore her. He even said she had a strong obsession with him, but not to worry because he would talk to her. Nick seemed very confident in his words, but I still wasn't too convinced. This really seemed strange to me, especially since he never mentioned anything about having a roommate, but still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Over the next few weeks, the strange calls continued, each time with increasing intensity. This woman began to tell me details about Nick's lies and manipulations, that he and his girlfriend had moved together from the Middle East under very suspicious circumstances, that he was not even a U.S. citizen, having entered the country illegally, and that his real intentions were to marry me in order to obtain citizenship papers. Although I had initially decided to trust Nick, this person had already planted the seeds of doubt in my mind. However, every time I confronted him about his roommate's claims, Nick would deny it very firmly and insist that she was an obsessed stalker and that she was hell-bent on destroying his life because he wasn't paying attention to her. She even, to allay my concerns about his citizenship, showed me a U.S. passport. At that point, I began to doubt my own judgment. I felt foolish and paranoid. I really began to convince myself that this woman was actually telling me lies to destroy Nick. But there was a little voice in my head telling me that I had to make sure I was putting my trust in the right person. So one night, I decided to set a little trap. That night, I decided to drive to Nick's apartment unannounced. I needed to get solid proof of whether or not this supposed girlfriend existed. I needed to know who was really lying in this whole situation. I really wanted to think that Nick was telling me the truth, but it also made me a little nervous. Because if so, I would look like a paranoid freak when I showed up unannounced at his place, and that could ruin things between us, but I still took the risk. As I parked on the street, my hands were shaking with nervousness. But before I got out of the car, a tall, dark woman came to the window and told me that she was the one who had been calling me all this time. And certainly her voice matched the voice of the person I had spoken to. Without much ado, the woman began to tell me the story. But not only that, she showed me evidence. She showed me the photos of Nick with his girlfriend, and in these could be seen entering the apartment together, him getting into the car with her. But what shocked me the most, in the video he told her that everything was going to be fine, that this was something he needed to do for the good of both of them, that she should not be jealous and that she should see it as a mere formality to be able to be together legally in this country. What hurt me the most about this is that in the video he was dressed exactly the same as he was on our first date, and the date on the video matched that day perfectly. This girl had secretly recorded them. She was sharing the apartment with them and another person, and she was trying to warn me all this time about the plans of this manipulative and evil man. Finding out about this really broke my heart. I don't remember feeling this bad in a long time. I asked her to send me the pictures and video, and she did. That same afternoon, I sent the evidence to Nick along with a message letting him know that I never wanted to hear from him again, and that if he ever contacted me, I would report him to immigration. I then blocked his number and his contact on Tinder, deleted all our conversations, and just started to digest that everything I had experienced in the last few weeks was a big lie. The following weeks, I fell into a terrible depression, blaming myself for having believed in this man. I felt too silly for having fallen into his game. I had really fallen in love with this guy in a very short time. Nick was a professional manipulator and a master of deception. After this, I had a hard time trusting someone again. I deleted my Tinder profile and said goodbye to online dating for a long time. This experience left me very stunned, and although it may seem exaggerated to some, it really had a strong psychological and emotional impact on me, and it took me a long time to start opening up again to meet other people. Fortunately, I never heard from this man again. A few years ago, when I was just 22, I tried my luck on a dating site called manoffish.com. This was just a few months before Tinder started to become popular among young people, and I definitely had a much better experience with that app, as it seemed like everyone who was divorced and people who had done terribly in love were signed up on manoffish.com, as if they had gambled their last dime on finding love online. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm wrong, or that I'm looking down on these people or anything like that. On the contrary, I really hope they all got what they were looking for. But for a guy of only 22 years old, The experience of meeting people through that site had not been the most satisfying thing in the world. I did meet a couple of women, but they were older than me and definitely wanted other things. However, after a few months on the website, I felt that my luck was changing because I finally met this cute girl named Angelica, who, besides being very beautiful and charming, she was the same age as me, and according to what she said, she was also in college. The only detail is that we were in different cities, although within the same state. But still, I was very interested in her. Angelica and I started talking through the app chat, but then we exchanged numbers and started communicating through text messages. She was an absolutely lovely girl and had a great sense of humor. We talked daily, and she was as interested as I was in seeing each other in person. But for that, I had to wait until December when I got a vacation from college. But I was so excited about this girl, I didn't mind at all waiting to meet her in person. Finally, my vacation arrived, and the first thing I did was to buy a ticket to go see her in her city. I also booked a room in a small hotel where I planned to stay for the next 15 days. As soon as I arrived in the city, the first thing I did was to call her and arrange to finally meet. I was really excited to meet her. For our first date, I invited her to a small cafe that was near where I was staying. That afternoon we had a great time, and it was really everything I expected. She also seemed to be very happy, and above all, there was a lot of chemistry between us. That day we had our first kiss, and we arranged to meet that weekend. I had thought about inviting her to dinner at a nice restaurant I had seen downtown, but she had a much better plan, or at least I thought so at the time. She told me that her parents would be away from home for the weekend, that they were both going to visit a relative who lived in another city for the vacations, and she arranged for me to meet her on Saturday afternoon at her house. This was music to my ears. I know this may sound cheeky, but upon telling me that his parents were not going to be there, my first thought was that maybe it's not just about watching a movie and eating pizza. I thought, if I played the game right, I could stay there for breakfast too, if you know what I mean. For the next 2 days, I waited anxiously for that Saturday until it finally arrived. That day, I arrived at her house with pizza and drinks, and everything went as planned. It was a wonderful afternoon, and in the evening, she invited me to stay, and I accepted without thinking about it. The next morning, after spending a wonderful night, I woke up earlier than her, and although this sounds creepy, I just lay there in bed watching her sleep. But she looked so beautiful while she slept that I couldn't help myself to stay like an idiot just admiring her and enjoying that little feeling of victory that you get after things go as you wanted on a date. However, this feeling was quite short-lived, because after a few minutes I started to hear someone open the front door and then slam it shut. Knowing that someone was downstairs in the house, I immediately got out of bed to get dressed, as there was no way I wanted my first introduction to her parents to simply show up at their house after I had gone to bed, obviously with their daughter, taking advantage of their absence. The moment I jumped out of bed, she woke up too, and upon hearing that her parents had arrived, she started freaking out and desperately telling me that I had to hide. At the same time, I started hearing footsteps coming up the stairs. At that point, I simply put on what little clothing I had within reach and dove under the bed as quickly as I could, staying very, very still and silent. A few seconds later, the door opened, and I saw the feet of a man, who I thought was her father. He came in as if it was nothing, but the way he started talking to her was not the way a father talks to his daughter. At that moment, I thought the worst. The first thing that came to my mind was that maybe she had some kind of unhealthy relationship with her dad. One of these cases where fathers abuse their children or something like that. However, as the conversation progressed, I began to realize that they were definitely not father and daughter. It seemed that my ideal girl had a sugar daddy-style relationship with this guy, because to play by her voice and the shoes she was wearing, she was older. At this point, I realized the situation I was in, and the thought of being discovered by this guy scared me a hell of a lot more than running into her father. But then I heard him mention that he was going to go take a shower. This was a great relief, because I knew that while I was in the shower I would have a window of time to escape. So as soon as the man left the room and went to the bathroom that was outside in the hallway, I immediately got out from under the bed and started to put on the rest of my clothes. This while whispering to Angelica, "What the hell were you thinking putting me in danger like this?" To which she only said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't think I would be home so soon." She didn't even notice the fact that she lied to me about living with her parents and that she never told me she was in a relationship with someone else. At that point, I was very angry about all the things I had lied about, but I didn't even bother to mention them. After all, my priority was to get out of there while the guy was still in the shower. I figured I would have at least a 5-minute window to get out of the house without him noticing. However, just as I left the room and was about to go downstairs, the man came out of the bathroom covered only by a towel, and we stood face to face in the doorway of the room. Immediately, the man asked me, "Who are you?" And then there was a moment of silence in which he looked over my shoulder into the room and at the girl behind me, and quickly added 2 + 2. Needless to say, at that very moment I started running for my life down the stairs before he reacted, but I knew he was following in my footsteps because of the screams behind me. And when I finally approached the front door, I felt my shirt being grabbed and pulled back, but somehow I managed to break free and get a little more distance between us. Then, as I desperately ran down the street, I looked back and saw that the man, who was huge and burly and about 40 years old, was running after me completely naked and with an expression on his face that clearly said, "I'm going to tear you apart when I catch up with you." I swear to God, I had never been so terrified in my life. Just being beaten up by a guy much bigger than me and completely enraged was scary enough, but to have this same guy pounce on me naked and punch the life out of me was just another level of scary. At that moment, I started running as fast as I could. Fortunately, I am a thin and small guy, and this gave me some advantage, but you should never underestimate an angry man. However, I stopped hearing his footsteps behind me, and the next time I turned around, he was gone. Perhaps he realized that I was running naked through the streets in the middle of the morning at 9 a.m. and decided to go back to the house before a neighbor called the police. As soon as I had the chance, I stood on the street, got into the first cab that passed by, and asked her to take me to my hotel, from where I would not leave for at least the next 3 days. But the craziest part of this whole experience is that the shameless Angelica wrote me back apologizing for what happened and saying that she had a great time with me and that she really wanted to see me again. At that moment, I realized that this woman was crazy and that in some twisted way, she enjoyed the idea of seeing 2 men fighting over her. This girl was a sick, manipulative, lying, unfaithful person. I wrote her a single message to tell her never to contact me again and then deleted her number. Fortunately, I never heard from Angelica again. However, all this made me wonder, how many other kids did she entangle in this sick game? And I also thought about the fact that maybe some of them were not lucky enough to escape. Thank God I never went through a similar experience again, but after that, every time a girl invited me to stay at her house, I couldn't help but get nervous.